Okay, so what we're going to do now is demonstrate how to start covering. We're going to cover these wings. These are the bottom wings. So I covered actually everything else because that way I could test and make sure I could do it. And it gave me a good sort of system. So what I've got here is my little glue stick, which is much better than the old-fashioned dope. I've killed a lot of brain cells using dope back when I was little. Here are pieces of paper. Here's white that's going to go on the bottom, which we'll start covering first. And then here's this weird brown color that sort of approximates the PC10 of the original, I think. And then I've got some rubbing alcohol that I'm going to use to shrink it a little bit. I've got a bunch of, I'll show these later, but I got a bunch of quarters on the table which are going to support the wing as I dry it. And then I've got a bunch of weights over here, spice containers. So this is really, oh, and a brush, because I'm going to use a brush to put on the alcohol. So this is actually really, really easy, and it's non-toxic. It's so much better than it used to be. What we're going to do is cover the bottom first, put this thing wet over these little quarters that are over here that I'll show you, and that will elevate everything just a little bit so the air can get over there and dry it. And then weigh down the edges so you don't get any warps. Although this paper has been pre-shrunk on a, actually I taped it to a window and wet it down with water. And then the next morning I cut it out and then I actually ironed them. Mike Moreau taught me how to do that. And then it shouldn't shrink so much. The idea is if you shrink these with water or even isopropanol too much, the whole frame is going to become a pretzel. Even so, you want to weigh it down when it's drying. And in this case, I may have overdone it because everything else I've covered looks okay, especially from a foot away, but it isn't as tight as I'd like it in terms of on the frame. But this was sort of an experiment, and that's okay. So what you do is, I was taught by my dad to only put dope or glue on the outside edges. But what I do now is I basically put on a nice coat of this glue. Oh, and we're going to do the bottom first, you bonehead. So we turn it over. We're going to do the bottom first. And what I do is I go around the edges just like my dad taught me. But then I also am going to put a little lick of glue on every rib station, because I think if it does start to shrink, if it's got like anchoring on each of the rib bays, I do think that might help, at least in my mind. It might help with a little bit of anti-wrinkling. That's what I think happens. But here I make sure this is all coated in this part, because this is where it's going to be fitting into the fuselage. There's where our landing gear is going to go, so that all has to be nice and glued. So you glue this all the way around. It's as exciting as it seems. You do have to support the trailing edge. I do it just with my fingers, because this is very delicate. This is all, in this case, 1/32 sheet. Which if it was laminated tips, it'd be a little bit stronger, but I did it just as the kit said. So I got all the edges done, and I just come down and I give each of those ribs a little shot. The center's already done, I think. And this stuff gets very sticky. Not impossibly sticky, but it does get sticky. And it dries pretty fast, but not so fast that you don't have time to do this and get things ready. So there's a couple ways to do this. You can put it on wet. What I find on these, at least so far on this one, is on curved fuselages I put it on wet, but on this kind of stuff I put it on dry. So you just go on here and you line it up so you got tissue everywhere, just like that. And I start from the center and use my thumbs, and I sort of try to pull it out and kind of stretch it, and try to get out as many wrinkles, make it as flat as I can. And this new kind of paper, I got this from Valère products. I'll try to remember to put a link into the little video. But it's really good. I think it's called a Saki tissue. And it's very nice. It's very forgiving. It makes really nice. I mean, it will stretch and make things really good even if you're not that good. So it makes anybody look pretty good in terms of covering. In the old tissue I used to use, you really had to know what you're doing, in my opinion. This is a little bit nicer. It's just more user-friendly. So you go around, you put all these pieces on here, and you make sure the bays are covered. And you got glue. You're touching everything. And some people, this is already pre-stretched, like I said. With some really ultra lightweight models, you just leave this as is. You don't even do any more stretching. You just do it. And that would be sufficient. This is actually quite nice. There's nothing wrong with this. In my case, I do want to stretch it a little bit to see if I can get some of the extra wrinkles out. Now you need a sharp razor blade, which this isn't. But on parts that are like this, you want to cut little relief cuts so that things will actually bend over, and you'll end up getting nice connections. So you just make sure everything is down the way you think it should be. Make sure everything is dry, or not dry, but just connecting. Again, this takes a little while to dry. But again, if you wanted to stop right there, you're done. You could trim the edges, bam, you're finished. That would be sufficient. In my case, I'm gonna wet this down. So I'm gonna move the little camera and then show you how to do that. Okay, so now that I have this all done, all covered, I'm going to take my old brush. Most people just use a bottle, but I don't happen to have one. I'm just gonna take this long, fluffy, delicate brush and just add some isopropyl straight out of the bottle. And you want to wet it down. And again, if this hadn't been pre-stretched, this would actually stretch pretty well. As it is, it takes out a couple of the wrinkles, but it doesn't completely stretch tight as a drum. And again, the main reason for doing this and being careful with the stretching and the pre-wetting and all this is because you don't want this thing to stretch so much, because believe me, you'll get warps in there and you'll never, well, it's hard to get them out. So there it is, all wetted down, and it looks weird now. It looks wrinkled, it doesn't look that wonderful. What we're gonna do is trust on this lovely tissue. We're gonna turn this thing over, and we'll put it over these quarters I have laid out here previously. And all they do is make it so that I'm a little above the table, and I have them in supporting in locations that are on the edges of things. And then you put some kind of suitable weight down. I got a huge number of my wife's spices from her spice drawer, and I just weigh this thing down. And when we do cover the top, we're actually going to weigh it down and force a little bit of what amounts to warp, a little bit of washout. And I'll show you what that means in a second here. Anyway, you basically make sure that this thing is all weighed down, and don't be shy, you're not going to break anything. And things have to be relatively heavy. They don't have to be, you don't have to put pounds of weight on here, but they do have to be pretty heavy in order to do their job. And the quarters are just there to elevate everything. So everything's weighed down. So let that go. But while I'm at it, I want to show you one other thing. So when you cover anything, what you have to do first is find the grain of the paper. So if you're really good, you can just hold the thing up to the light and you can sort of see grain. In my case, I've gotten confused before and messed it up. So I find the grain by taking a tiny little edge and ripping it. And you see how this is ripping kind of nice and straight? Okay. Whereas if I rip it this way, it goes all over the place. Okay. That means the grain is going this way. And so what you do is you make sure you put things down lengthwise. So if you're doing a stabilizer that's shaped like this, you put this way. The wings were shaped like this, you put it this way. I think that helps with in terms of stretching and everything. Anyway, we will let this go and see how it dries. The alcohol dries pretty fast, which is really good. Here are the fuselage and the top wing covered, and I even put on some little tissue roundels, and I'll show you how those are done when we do the bottom. We put roundels on the bottom wing. This one's even a little bit loose, so I'll put a little more glue on there and glue it down. You could spray paint these, which I do often for the heavier airplane, but I think that this one needs to be light. So I didn't do that. But I also put down the little, I made little tissue fin flashes for the rudder. And the fuselage was covered the very same way, only difference being that on the turtle deck, I covered that wet because I had to stretch over the turtle deck. And you can see I haven't trimmed the interior of the cockpit yet. But this was done the very same way, white on the bottom. There's a little piece on here once I put the wing in, it'll have to be covered. This is left open because that's where you're going to mess around with the rear motor peg. But anyway, it looks really cool being almost all covered. So I will cover the rest of the top or the bottom wing, the rest of the bottom wing, and show you how to put the little markings on. And then it's a matter of doing a little painting, because I'm going to put some gray on the fuselage where they're supposed to be metal, I think. And then we'll start putting this thing together. All right, so now we have covered the bottom wing, and I took it apart, or I took off all the weights. And I don't know if you can see it too well, but this looks pretty well stretched. There are places where it's not perfect, but I'm okay with that. More importantly, it's straight and it's not warped. And what we're going to do now, and so using these quarters really helped. And so now when we cover the top, we're just going to press it all down like this firmly, and then that will keep everything nice and flat. But then we're also going to add these two little quarters on the very tips, right there and right here. And that's because what we're going to put in is a teeny bit, whatever the thickness of a quarter is, an American quarter. It looks like it's, maybe 32nd of an inch or so, a little more. A little bit of washout. So everything will be pushed down, and you'll have a little bit of washout, meaning the trailing edge of the wing on that tip will go up like this. I don't know if this is visible, but this is the top wing, and it isn't really visible. But back here on the trailing edge, it actually goes up a little bit, has a little bit of an upsweep. And what that does is make it so the wingtip doesn't stall so quick, and it might give me a little more stability, which I might need, because I don't know how well this is going to work without dihedral. So I'm putting a little bit of washout on each wingtip. So this is exactly the same. I have my paper cut the way I want it. Fits over everything. This is a curved surface, so I'm going to have to pull it a little bit more, maybe. But you do the very same thing as the last one. So if you want to go get coffee or have a smoke, go ahead. Because all you do is, again, go around all the edges and put your glue or your dope. You can still use dope. That'll work fine. Ooh, and I just found something that I might have a problem with here now, because to cover this, oh no, I won't. I'll just cover it right here to here. It'll only cover to the middle section, so it'll be actually covered in two pieces, which is fine. That'll actually make it a little better, a little less likely to warp. So on that wing, on the wings, I kind of put some glue on the leading edge because I'll kind of pull it down past the leading edge and it will hopefully glue on nicely. I'll do the same thing, put a little bit of glue on here, and also make sure I put glue where those interplane struts go on those pieces of balsa there. So then we turn it around, we do the same thing on this side. Put some stuff on here, and you just got to be careful holding this because again, this is pretty delicate. It's not as delicate as like real indoor models like those gossamer winged things. It's not that delicate, but stuff covered in microfilm and things. But you can put your hand through this, no problem. And that's a bummer. So you do have to be careful. If you're building something bigger like the Wildcat and the Vengeance that we have, that is a video here that shows us trying to fly those. Those are a little bigger, a little heavier, and you can manhandle them a little bit more. But put this on all the way down. And I think we're ready. So, kind of the same thing as before. Take this piece of paper, and actually I'm going to cut it before I do anything because now, since I did forget that I have this here, I'm going to cut it so that it is easier to do. So we put one end down here. And we stick the other one down here. Just like that. And we do just like we did in the bottom wing. Pull things like this. Pull them down. Make them as tight as you can. And again, the next one I try with this, maybe I will not pre-shrink the tissue quite as much as I pre-shrunk this, but and here's this part I'm going to bring down like so. And then just trying to make sure I got as few wrinkles as I can. Do the other side, pulling and tugging. And pulling sort of on both ends, both sides is helpful. That sort of helps pull things and make sure that they're kind of wrinkle free. And just like the back side, if you did not want to shrink this anymore or anything, you could use this as is. You absolutely would not need to keep working this. You could use it and fly it just like it is. We're going to probably spray it with a little bit of acrylic, clear flat acrylic to sort of seal it a little bit, but that's it. Again, make sure all of my contact points are on there. And then I did go out in the garage and get a half decent blade, so with a fresh blade, I'll go in here and sort of start trimming this with a fresh blade. See how easy that is? It's a no-brainer. I definitely should have used it on the other side because it takes no skill at all. Look at that, just off it comes. So I definitely should have done that because the right tool and sharp tools makes all the difference. Don't make do right. Dudley do right. Okay, so you don't have to trim these beforehand, but this way it's showing you how this trims with a blade. I did notice a guy used a sanding block, of all things, to trim. A fella from the UK, and it worked really well. He would just use a sanding block on the edge, and that would basically sand off the tissue in very minute amounts, end up getting a very clean edge. And so I have used that a little bit, and that's a really good idea. I'm just not doing it on this one, at least initially. I might do it a little later. So we get this tip off here, but you can see with a sharp blade, it's no problem. And I might come through, this is where my paper modeling helps, I might come through and color the edges with a little bit of magic marker or paint, just to make them look prettier. Okay, so this thing is trimmed. I didn't trim these edges right here yet, but I'll get those later. But this thing is ready now to weigh down. So we will take our alcohol. We'll go ahead and paint this on down. And again, the smart thing is probably just to use a sprayer. On the other hand, this is much more controllable than spray going everywhere. So maybe this was a happy accident. I didn't have any a spray bottle. I steal my wife's bottle. It has water in it for things, for spraying the cat. But I shouldn't do that. And so I just used my brush, and it actually seems like it's not a bad idea. So again, it's wrinkled a little bit, but we're not worried. Now we set this guy down on the table. Now we don't have to worry about using, any kind of supports all over the place, because for the underneath side, because there's really no need. This thing is you're drying the top side, but I just do like we did before, all the way around the edges with whatever you have handy. Like I said, I use these little spices, but that's because they're handy. Whatever works for you. And now we just let this thing go. Again, just let it go. I'll even put, well, I think it'll be okay. I was gonna say I'll put something right here in the center, but it seems like it's flat, so it's not going anywhere. So now we just let this dry, and then when it's dry, I can show you how to put on the little, our supposed decals. Going very well. Okay, so now we're going to put the little decals on. But look at how nice these turned out. All I did was trim these little pieces in here, and this actually turned out pretty smooth and nice. This is the top of the bottom wing. Looks really good. So now we're going to put these roundels on. So all these were white tissue that I took circles and did a word program, made circles in it, put it through the printer with some of this white paper that was already stretched, taped it with some Scotch tape, and just fed it through the manual feeder part on the printer, and it printed real nice. Good enough for me. And then we're just going to put these and stick them right where they're supposed to go on the wings, on either side underneath. And looking at how I did the top ones, it looks like I want to match them. I put them kind of right about here. So all you do, I cut these out, by the way, with a little Olfa or X-Acto, whatever, little compass circle cutter, which works really well. So all I do with this is I turn them over. I guess either side doesn't matter. But I put a bunch of your glue stick glue on the end, or on the side, on the back side, all the way out to the edge. And then you just simply take this and apply it where it's supposed to go. So putting it right about at the edge of this little outer rib, and then about touching like that is fine. And I just smooth it out, and it will actually smooth out pretty well. when it dries, because right now it's a little wrinkly, and see this part didn't glue very well. So I will put a little glue underneath there. It'll stick better second time through. Put that on. That's all there is to that. Take the other one. Do the same ever-loving thing. Glue it all the way. Get it nice and full of glue. Pick it up. Match it to where it's supposed to go. That looks about right. Based on where the leading edge is and then where it ends up on that edge. And then you, carefully as you can, trying to avoid wrinkles if possible, you just put that guy down using very delicate pressure, because you're going to put your finger through the tissue if you're not careful. And that will dry. And look at that. We have got all of our parts covered. There's one little tiny piece of tissue left to cover to make it all finished. But there's the top and the bottom wing really ready to go. So that's pretty exciting. And now we will, the next time I talk to you, we'll probably just start trying to assemble this thing. Put the bottom wing on first. We'll paint the struts and we'll paint some of the front end of the fuselage, but then we'll start really assembling this thing. So we'll probably start putting this thing together tonight.